Thank you, Justin, for inviting me. I'm going to talk to you today about the Brown Institute. Well, actually, before I start, let me give you a little bit background about myself. I am a statistician by training. My doctorate's in statistics, and I find myself housed in the Columbia School of Journalism. I've been there for 2 years now, and you could ask, what is a journalist doing in a school of journalism? I have a little quote that I can read you, although I have to take my glasses off because that's what old people do. This is a quote from Joseph Pulitzer, the founder of the school. Pulitzer Prizes are named after him. And in his essay, The College of Journalism, that appeared in the North American Review, he talks a little bit about what should be taught in a school of journalism. And he has this to say: everybody says that statistics should be taught, but how? I should mention, this was an article in 1904. Everyone that says that statistics should be taught, but how? Statistics are not simply figures. It's said that nothing lies like figures except facts. You want statistics to tell you the truth. You can find truth there if you know how to get at it. And this is the interesting part, romance, human interest, humor, and fascinating revelations as well. The journalist must know how to find all these things, truth, of course, first. So Pulitzer, in 1904, just to give you a sense how many statisticians, but 1904, this was 2 years before Gossett started his research on the t-test. Fisher hadn't really started doing anything yet. So Pulitzer had this idea that data could be this kind of amazing source of story. Right? And so journalists now are starting to take up data as a source of story. And so what I want to talk to you today is an elaboration of that, just not just data as a source of story, but sort of tech and technology, data code, algorithm as ways to both tell and find stories more broadly. And I'm going to tell the story today in the context of the Brown Institute for Media Innovation. The Brown Institute was a $30 million gift from Helen Gurley Brown before she passed away. She was the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine for 35 years. Her husband, David Brown, was a movie producer, producing films like Jaws and Driving Miss Daisy. And they both believed that there was they both believed in the idea of providing sort of funds, providing resources for students, for people to sort of follow their dreams, and believed in the use of technology as a way of telling stories. And so what they created in the Brown Institute is actually split into two pieces. Half is at Columbia Journalism, and the other half is at Stanford Engineering. There's Bernd Giraud. Say hello, Bernd. He directs the half at Stanford. And so it's quite literally a combination of two cultures, two ways of thinking about the world. So New York City, the School of Journalism, the home of media, and Stanford engineering, technology, and the startup culture. Of course, it doesn't really remain that stylized. There's a whole lot of blending that goes on, but that was our origin story. As Justin mentioned, we had a huge opening ceremony, and I'm so happy with how this went, and I'm so happy that I don't have to actually be anticipating it coming, but that it's behind us now. We had an opening for our space because David Brown was a movie producer, and Helen Gurley Brown was famously known to, her office in the Hearst Tower had leopard print carpet and pink walls. So we tried to quote a little bit of David Brown with a red carpet and the dorkiest step and repeat you could imagine, because it had the word Brown on it, but then it also had Columbia Journalism and Stanford Engineering. Every color, by the way, that the Brown has was a different color for a cover that appeared for Cosmo magazine during Helen's tenure in September, because we opened in September. We had a big party, we had a band. You can see a huge leopard print piece of fabric covering over the space before it opened. And then once people were allowed in, this is what the space looks like. Chantel Martin was there finishing a mural, and eventually this is what the space looks like. It won't look like that all the time. We have seminars. We had our first one just a couple weeks ago about the past, present, and future of data visualization. But what I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about what the Brown Institute does. So that's a little bit about its home at Columbia. The Brown Institute gives away or has fellowships and also gives away something called Magic Grants. Magic, again, coming from a reference to Helen Gurley Brown, who I think who was quoting a moment in her life when she just needed a chance. Someone did a little magic in her life. And so these are supposed to kind of remind us that we're funding technology, technology. Yes, we're funding sort of a startup framework, but we're also funding people. So what I thought I would do is quickly tell you about some of the projects that we're engaged in, and then also some of the events that we've been supporting that start to walk this combination between technology and storytelling. And I'm going to tell you about some projects that have emerged at Stanford, some projects that have emerged through the through the Columbia half. I apologize, and the ones that are in between. This is a project called Widescope, which is, and it's pair synap, which are about computational ways of coming to consensus. It's an example of what the team calls deliberative democracy. Here it's being applied for budget collaborations, finding optimal, or let's say consensus budgets. It was applied in a real case scenario in Finland's off-road traffic law. Apparently there is some controversy about what those laws should be exactly, and the team here helped with coming up with a kind of consensus solution of what the laws should look like. These are a couple of the team members who are helping out with a participatory budget or a collaborative budget exercise in the 49th Ward of Chicago. And it basically was looking at what kinds of projects available that could be funded using the aldermen's funds, sort of their discretionary funds. Should it be something about a park? Should it be something about a water feature, an AstroTurf soccer field, or what have you? And it was a way to achieve a kind of consensus around what things were of value in the community. Another project, this one comes from Columbia, is called Bushwig. It has to do with the drag renaissance going on in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Apparently, 5-10 years ago, there wasn't a single drag show in Bushwick, and now in any given evening, you can see 10 or 12. This started as a documentary film project by Adam Golub. He paired up with a woman who's now a postdoc at Microsoft who studies how subcultures make use of information technologies. And the project has really become about identity curation in an age of Facebook. And this is very timely because it just came up that Facebook has started chasing down the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy Perpetual Indulgence, sorry, to say, you know, you can't have two pages, right? You have to use your real name, and if you're going to have 2 pages, you have to have a fan page and another, not really providing you with a nuanced notion of what identity might mean. And while drag is kind of an extreme notion of playing with identity, we make identity choices every time we send email and we pick the mail account that we send something from, right? We are taking on a personality in that moment. So that project is producing an archive. And eventually a kind of installation that allows you to play with, again, the notion of identity, and it's all done through the lens of the drag arts. As Moore mentioned, this is a project. CityBeat was also funded by Brown and with co-funding by the Tau Center this year. And you've probably seen the demo up down the street, so I'm not going to spend too much time with that. At Columbia this year, we funded a project called Cannabis Wire. It's a single subject news site that specializes in news games around understanding the complexity of cannabis legislation. Right? It's becoming a very hot topic at the moment, but there are sort of difficult issues around it. The first game they're putting on is called Grow On, and the challenge is to grow as much high-quality cannabis as you can while reducing your carbon footprint. And the game will end when your plant dies. So anyway, it turns out there's a lot more complexity to making a healthy pot plant than one would think. What's interesting about this is that the 2 students who started this were both journalists. This is Allison and Nushin. We sent them to ITP summer camp because the journalists don't get a lot of training in that regard. They had a blast at summer camp. They learned about games. They became fellows of the New York City Media Center, started working with people at Playmatics, and have really blossomed and have started to really take this on. Justin, can you tell me how much time I have left? 1 or 2 more minutes. That sucks. We also had another project from Columbia called Science Surveyor. The idea is that a science reporter on deadline, some new piece of literature comes up, they have to summarize it. They have to say something about it, and on deadline. Often what happens is it promotes the kind of journalism where there's some quote from the author, then there's some quote from some grumbly academic on the other side. Oh, this is all wrong, and then there's some mushy close, and then you're out, right? And the problem is that there's a huge number of articles that are published in a huge number of journals, and sometimes journalists get it wrong. The lead on this project, Marguerite Holloway, who runs our science reporting program, uses this as an example from 2006. This came out in Nature. The article being that methane emissions from terrestrial plants under aerobic conditions, so that methane emissions come from or were observed from terrestrial plants under aerobic conditions, which is not at all how people expected methane to be produced. And methane is one of the sort of most deadly gases in global warming. And so it promoted, a scientist, or a journalist under deadline would have to take a headline like that and go, oh gosh, is this a crazy paper? Is this a good paper? Is this, like, how do I figure this out, right? And so they might take to a search engine, and what they get is a list of 15,000 references. How am I going to figure out where this thing is in the grand scheme of things? Unfortunately, this particular one produced headlines like this: global warming, blame it on the forests. The solution should not be chop down all the trees because of global warming, right? So journalists need a little help to navigate complex scientific results, and so the science surveyor is broken down into 3 layers. One is a consensus layer, where you can decide, is this particular article part of the mainstream or is it not? There's a temporal layer that looks at how references to a particular topic appears over time. This is a reference to, this particular plot refers to neurogenesis, the ability of neurons to regenerate in the brain. And there was some activity in the field for a while, and then suddenly it stopped because of a paper that said, oh, this is garbage, it doesn't exist, and sort of killed the field for a long time until it suddenly started to come back up again. And then finally, there'd be a funding layer. Who's paying for all of this research, and how does that affect the results? The last piece that I was going to talk about is something called Art++. It comes from a fantastic collaboration between a curator at Stanford and a virtual reality researcher in Bairn's lab, which is looking at sort of virtual reality applied to, or augmented reality rather, applied to a museum context where you can index all of the objects in the collection. So this is an example of their researcher wandering around with a pad. There's an automatic identification of images going on and some information going on with these images. And there can be an overlay on top where maybe the particular people who are highlighted in a painting a backstory can be provided. So to close, Brown funds a series of projects. We also try to support, I'll just tell you a little on the Columbia side, we try to support journalism students as they acquire sort of technology skills, as they acquire an understanding of technology. So this year we sent some Columbia journalism students to ITP summer camp. They were so happy. We also have been holding a series of dinners that are about creating a new sort of domain-specific language for journalists. So if we were going to create a language, a new programming language that was used for journalists, that was made specifically for the practice of journalism, what would it look like? Right? Maybe it wouldn't be Python. Maybe it would be something else. And my secret suspicion is that the story would be a program. But anyway, that's just my own thing. I'm getting the wrap up. I'm going to just skip past that. Let me just tell you about a couple of things that we have coming up. We go from drag to Bruno Latour. So we're hosting Bruno Latour next week. He's giving a series of public lectures, and then he's having 3 performances of a play he created called Gaia Global Circus. Look them up on the web, bruno.brown.columbia.edu. Come along and join us. I don't know if there are tickets still available at the kitchen, but perhaps. And then finally, we're supporting this year, we're hosting this year the Computation and Journalism Symposium, where we're looking at technologies that support the practice of journalism. And there are topics like accuracy and verification, journalism ethics, media bias and diversity, and so on. So before Justin has an aneurysm, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Mark, we don't have time for questions.
That's fine.
But how do people get in touch with you if they have a question?
Mark H, M-A-R-K-H, @columbia.edu. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.